Welcome back to today's video. Today is Tuesday, October 17th, 2023, and today we are going to be talking about the Speaker of the House, elections that are occurring on the House floor right now, as Representative Jim Jordan from the state of Ohio has lost the first round in a bid to become the next Speaker. The House Speaker election, one that feels eerily reminiscent of the one that Kevin McCarthy undertook when he went through 15 rounds of voting for his speakership, and is ultimately being displayed straight to the American public as a spectacle amongst the Republican Party. That in yet the second time this year, the first round of votes fails to secure a speaker. Now, on the House side of things, there has been a lot of movement amongst the higher level leadership. To give you a bit of context about how this might be playing in the minds of the American public, we start back off in January of 2023. When Kevin McCarthy won the speakership after the 15th vote, after concessions to members of the extreme right wing. Now, we have to say that this 15 rounds of votings occurred over a 4-day period. It wasn't until that fourth day that Kevin McCarthy officially received enough votes to become the next House Speaker. And with these votes came a lot of media attention. This was a historic number of votes, one of the longest times we have ever taken any Congress to nominate a speaker, though there have been longer times, which is interesting. But now we're back at a point, where things feel very similar to how they did on that cold January morning, right, when Kevin McCarthy had gone through numerous rounds of votes. 15 rounds of voting. I mean, it was quite crazy to think about, but also, given how they are acting now, quite frankly, not as crazy as it might have seemed prior to. Looking at Kevin McCarthy with this speakership vote, the way the American public sees this is that there was a standstill in the House with Kevin McCarthy. Kevin McCarthy wins the speakerships. Now Kevin McCarthy is ousted, right? He was kicked out of his position as speaker around 2 weeks ago, less than that. So Kevin McCarthy for a while has been out of the fray, 11 days now, 12 days now. But Republicans don't have a way to spin this. So Kevin McCarthy goes out after all this contention, one of the shortest lived terms as a speaker. Then they nominate Steve Scalise, not Jim Jordan, who we're talking about today. I didn't do much coverage on Steve Scalise because I thought that he'd be here for a while. So I felt like, I was on a bit of a down period. So I felt that we would have time to talk about him, and said we did not have time. Steve Scalise is out now. They nominate Steve Scalise, can't coalesce support. Okay, then he drops out of the speaker race. Did this last Thursday at around 8 p.m. in the evening. So then they scramble. They nominate Jim Jordan. And now he's lost the first round of the speaker vote. So much disarray, so much that looks so poorly among the institution, and especially amongst the Republican Party. There is a lot here that Democrats can use and will use in their congressional campaign. And as someone who, is looking at this from an outside lens, you aren't going to, you might not care about all of this procedure, but what you are knowing is that there are constantly headlines about how the Republican Party cannot even govern itself, much less the federal government. This is the takeaway, that you have a lot of swing voters, especially voters who watch the news and are paying attention, who are swing voters. Think, white suburbanites who in past elections may have been Republican voters, but in the era of Trump and the era of the modern day Republican Party have shifted away from the GOP for a variety of reasons. This doesn't give them any more of a reason to focus on the election. And I think, it isn't just white suburbanites. It is all voters who watch the news intently across all racial backgrounds, who will not positively view the Republican Party after this, who will not positively view at least their chances of voting for the GOP in the upcoming election. Because I'm sure there are Republican voters that will still vote Republican, regardless of how much media they watch or how much they pay attention. They aren't going to be swayed by what they are seeing in the news, but they're interested, right? But there are a lot of swing voters here who I think really do matter. And the New York Times article here is doing live updates. They make a valid point about some of these Biden district Republicans that we will talk about in just a moment. But Jim Jordan losing the first doesn't seem to be the only, vote that he is going to lose. I think there's a strong possibility that they keep running it, and that they hold out until potentially Jim Jordan doesn't have enough votes. Now, to give you a bit of a recap, Jim Jordan currently has 200 votes. So an overwhelming majority of the Republican caucus and Republicans in the House have voted for Jim Jordan to become the next speaker. But then you have Steve Scalise, who gets 7 votes. It's the same Steve Scalise that dropped out of the speaker race. Those are defectors who don't want Jim Jordan. Then you have 6 votes for Kevin McCarthy, right? We remember him. He was the House Speaker. He's back in the fray slightly with 6 votes from members of the Republican caucus. Then Lee Zeldin, who currently is doing a lot for Republicans on the national level, but isn't in Congress. He was in Congress, though. Lee Zeldin at 3 speaker votes. Tom Emmer from North Carolina, 1 speaker vote. Mike Garcia from California. And, the list goes on with 1 vote here. And then, of course, Hakeem Jeffries at 212. The point being, there are a lot of defectors. You have 7 here, 6 here. Okay, that's 13, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. 20 Republicans who have pushed away from Jim Jordan. And this honestly wasn't expected, right? There obviously was going to be pushback from members of the center-right. And yes, they did expect this vote to fail. But there were more votes against him than I think they really did expect, right? Representatives such as the one from Idaho who voted against Jim Jordan. Victoria Spartz, who voted against Jim Jordan in the state of Indiana. I mean, all around, you have a lot of Republicans who are looking at this and saying, it's a different coalition than where it was under Kevin McCarthy, a different group of people holding out, and they all now have new things that they want to bring to the table and have given up in exchange for their vote. They are holding out. They are holding Jim Jordan's speakership hostage, and it is the same exact strategy that happened for Kevin McCarthy, and just months later, he was ousted from Speaker of the House of Representatives, and that very well could happen again to Representative Jim Jordan. And I also do want to say, the Democratic Party has not been kind to Jim Jordan. Not because they thought or knew that he would be in this position where he could be House Speaker, but because they simply see him as an extremist member of the GOP. And I do believe that a lot of America agrees. The reason why Steve Scalise was nominated in the first place, the conventional wisdom amongst pundits and those in and outside of Capitol Hill, was that Republicans did not want to run in an election alongside both Jim Jordan and Donald Trump. We know that Donald Trump is on track very easily to be the GOP nominee in 2024, and they were going to find a way to counteract that on the House Republican side, because they know that a bunch of their losses in 2022 were a result of Donald Trump's direct endorsement. For example, in Michigan's 3rd District, where you have John Gibbs, who ran on a very pro-Trump campaign, wasn't technically endorsed by Donald Trump, but was very much running with Donald Trump's attacks on candidates like Peter Meyer, who voted to impeach Donald Trump. This was a GOP-held district, and Hillary Scholten ended up winning against John Gibbs. And you look at a lot of these candidates here, a lot of these races in the House, especially in the Senate. Don't even get me started on here, but we will see it just more so on the statewide level, the true impact of an endorsement from Donald Trump and running alongside him. Dr. Oz in Pennsylvania, Herschel Walker in Georgia, Blake Masters in Arizona, Adam Laxalt in Nevada. I mean, all across the country, you saw numerous people endorsed by Donald Trump with very few positives. North Carolina, Ted Budd won, but in Wisconsin, Ron Johnson had a lot closer of a race than he was expecting leading into Election Day, given his polling data that was underestimating Democrats for the first time in a while in the state of Wisconsin. And you look at a number of House races, you look at a lot of the toss-ups, and you look back at 2020, which is a very different race, a very good one, I would say, for Republicans, where they won every single competitive race. This time in 2022, when it was meant to be a red wave year, Democrats came out ahead. And so a lot of uncertainty about the House elections if Jim Jordan is the one they're running against, which is why there is still some hesitancy, right? I think a lot of the people holding out and voting for Kevin McCarthy, I mean, even if you take away the Scalise votes, Zeldin, Emmer, Garcia, Cole, Massey, you take all of them, allocate them to Jim Jordan, he still loses the House vote because the Republicans can't afford to lose more than 4 votes given their majority at this time, moving to the opposing side. And here's the thing, they need an outright majority. Otherwise, the Democrats would have won the House speakership right now. They need more than 218. They need 218 or more. So if Republicans lose 4 to 5 votes, as they've lost 6 on Kevin McCarthy, that alone is enough to block Jim Jordan from being the next House Speaker. And in terms of electoral repercussion, we already touched on this about, the slim majority that Republicans have right now and, what it would be like running alongside someone like Jim Jordan. But we also have to take a look at the current status of the American public in the 2024 generic congressional vote, because this matters, right? Looking back at the 2022 midterms, we can say Republicans did well. They didn't have a red wave year, and Democrats certainly were able to win a number of competitive races, but at the end of the day, Republicans still did pick up House control. But that was with a generic ballot where they won nationally by around 3 points. Given how slim the House majority is right now, one could reasonably assume any slight improvement for Democrats. For example, when you take a look at these close races, 0.88%, 0.42%, 0.64%, 0.98%, those 4 races alone, they went blue, Democrats would have won. And you take a look over here too. Republican plus 0.63, Republican plus 0.49, right? Up across the country, you have competitive races that Democrats were able to do very well in. In Lauren Boebert's district, Colorado's 3rd, 0.17%. Republicans did not perform the way that they should have. And now, given they won by 3 in 2022, Democrats are only losing by 1. And in some polls, unlike 2022, again, 2024 data seems to suggest in some instances that Democrats are ahead. And the only poll taken in the month of October actually shows that Democrats ahead by 1 point across the country. So the generic congressional vote isn't exactly in favor of the GOP as it was in 2022. They know their majority is slim, and I can imagine they are freaking out about the level of ads and attacks that Democrats will levy against them should Jim Jordan become speaker. I mean, even in the 2022 midterm elections, Democrats were able to attack Jim Jordan and put him in comparison with a number of other Republicans, drew them, connected the dots, and voters didn't like that. Jim Jordan does have a reputation. He's not Lauren Boebert or Marjorie Taylor Greene, but as he becomes closer to being House Speaker, more and more Americans are going to know him. And with that, a lot of the opposition research, a lot of the attacks, and Republicans knew it too. When faced between an option of Steve Scalise and Rob, why did I say Rob Portman? I don't know where I got that. Jim Jordan, even though a lot didn't end up translating over in the actual speaker ballot, a lot of them went to Steve Scalise. The majority of the GOP went to Steve Scalise because they believed him to be the better candidate. Jim Jordan wasn't people's first choice in 2023. It was Kevin McCarthy. Then it was Steve Scalise, and now it's Jim Jordan. And yet they pushed this vote to the House floor, and Republicans fail to nominate a speaker. Again, eerily reminiscent of where it was for Kevin McCarthy just a year out from the 2024 presidential election that will coincide with numerous congressional elections. Republicans should be worried. And for those Biden district Democrats, like I mentioned way earlier on in the video, the New York Times makes a valid point here. Annie Carney says that on the first ballot, 12 Republicans from Biden districts voted for Jim Jordan. 6 others picked someone else. But regardless, it's a lose-lose proposition for them. Either they cast a vote that confirms them supporting a hard right member of the Make America Great Again wing, or they add to the stress that House Republicans are incapable of governing because they can't even choose a speaker. It's about doing this balancing act. But no matter how they cut it, the cards they have been dealt are so unfortunate that it makes it near impossible for them to come back to their constituents, to come back to Biden districts and say, I did what you would have wanted me to do. Because that's not at all what the voters in those Biden districts would have wanted them to do. They would have wanted them to vote for Hakeem Jeffries. Now, that obviously isn't going to happen, but Jim Jordan is no Kevin McCarthy. Jim Jordan is perceived as worse. Jim Jordan gets the short end of the stick. In the eyes of the American public, Jim Jordan is extreme, and with all this media attention, I can guarantee you his popularity will decrease, even though his name ID may be going up. I see this as the beginning of a very, very interesting process, where we will see what the right-wing members of the GOP are willing to give up in exchange for some of the more center-right voters, what they are willing or not willing to do. Because Steve Scalise, in his own capacity, was not even willing to move forward to the House floor vote, because he knew he would lose the vote. Jim Jordan, on the other hand, doesn't seem to care. And maybe he is employing a strategy that Kevin McCarthy employed. After 15 votes, Kevin McCarthy became House Speaker. Maybe Jim Jordan thinks it'll take him 14 votes instead. Regardless, I look at this and I say, it is a bad look for the Republican Party. It's an embarrassment, and it does show them and portray them in a consistent state of disarray. Republicans are not going to be fondly looked at when it comes down to the House of Representatives right now and potentially in the next upcoming election. There are repercussions far and wide, ones that we haven't even seen yet, and a lot of it has to do with the Republican Party's own inability to govern itself, and much less the federal government. And that is the perception of the American people and the narrative that has been told and will likely be received well. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch and then a playlist for my 2024 House election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.